It left quietly. No press conference. No announcement. No breaking news alert. A 97,000-ton nuclear-powered supercarrier simply slipped its moorings on the American East Coast and began crossing the Atlantic Ocean. The USS George H.W. Bush. 1,092 feet of American naval power. Destination, the Eastern Mediterranean. And then, if the orders come, south through the Suez Canal, into the Red Sea, toward the Persian Gulf, toward the exact same waters where two other American carriers are already conducting strikes against Iran. 3 carriers. Same theater. Same war. Simultaneously. This has not happened since the invasion of Iraq in 2003. But here is the critical difference. In 2003, the adversary did not have hypersonic glide vehicles, did not have an advanced drone program, did not have the capability to fire over 400 missiles across 9 countries inside a single week, did not have the capacity to threaten shipping lanes, airports, and cities at the exact same time. 3 American carriers against Iran in 2026 is not the same signal as 3 carriers against Iraq in 2003. The mathematics are completely different, and Tehran knows it. Stay with me, because the decision to send a 3rd carrier is not simply a military story. It is a story about what the United States is prepared to sustain, how long Washington believes this conflict will last, and why the arrival of this 3rd carrier changes the entire equation of this war in ways no official press release will ever say out loud. Let's start at the beginning, because to understand what a 3rd carrier actually means, you need to understand what the first 2 have already done, and why their operational tempo is precisely why the 3rd one is now crossing an ocean. The USS Abraham Lincoln and the USS Gerald R. Ford have been the primary naval instruments of this campaign since late February. The Lincoln, operating from the Arabian Sea, launched strike aircraft from day one. Its escort destroyers fired cruise missiles at Iranian infrastructure targets. It was there before the campaign officially began when one of its fighters intercepted an Iranian drone approaching the carrier group aggressively. The Gerald R. Ford, the most technologically advanced carrier ever constructed, deployed from its home port in mid-February. Its deployment was quietly extended. What was supposed to be a standard rotation became an 11-month commitment. It crossed into the Mediterranean, then transited south through the Suez Canal on March 5th into the Red Sea, positioning opposite Houthi forces in Yemen while the Iran campaign escalated. 2 carriers. 2 separate theaters. 1 week. 1 message. The United States can fight on multiple fronts simultaneously and sustain both. In the first week alone, American forces struck thousands of Iranian targets. Iranian naval vessels were sunk or severely damaged. Air defense systems were degraded. 2 stealth bombers dropped penetrating munitions directly onto hardened underground missile facilities. Command nodes were hit repeatedly. That is what 2 carrier strike groups enabled. Strike after strike. Wave after wave. Every single day. But that pace depletes things that never appear in the footage. Cruise missile inventories. Interceptor stockpiles on escort ships. Airframe hours on fighter jets. Maintenance cycles. Crew endurance. Weapons magazines that were completely full in late February are not full today. The 3rd carrier is not coming because the first 2 failed. It is coming because the first 2 succeeded at a tempo that now requires reinforcement and relief. That is the part no official statement will phrase directly. Now, let us talk about what a carrier strike group actually brings. Because when people hear the word carrier, they picture 1 ship. That is not what is crossing the Atlantic. The George H.W. Bush will arrive with roughly 40 to 44 F/18 Super Hornet strike fighters. It brings EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft specifically designed to jam enemy radar and suppress remaining air defense systems. It brings E-2D Hawkeye early warning aircraft, the eyes above the entire formation, tracking aircraft and incoming missiles across a vast operational radius. It brings helicopters for logistics, search and rescue, and recovery operations. And then there are the escorts. 3 guided missile destroyers in tight formation. Arleigh Burke-class ships carrying ballistic missile interceptors and land attack cruise missiles. Each one is simultaneously a strike battery and a defensive shield. Below the surface, a nuclear-powered attack submarine. Silent, armed, completely invisible, adding another layer to a formation already engineered to fight across every domain at once. This is not one ship crossing the Atlantic. This is a self-contained mobile warfare ecosystem. Expected arrival in 10 to 12 days. Then comes the operational decision. Does the Bush remain in the eastern Mediterranean, projecting power against Western Iranian targets? Or does it transit south through Suez into the Red Sea, allowing the forward to reduce tempo, replenish its weapons magazines, and rotate its aircrew while pressure on Iran never drops for a single day? Either option sustains the campaign. That is the entire point. 3 carriers allow continuous rotation without any relief gap. 1 replenishes while 2 strike. Then the roles rotate. The pressure on Tehran never stops, never pauses, never gives Iran a window to breathe or rebuild. Now consider this number carefully. The United States operates 11 aircraft carriers total. They are global strategic assets spread across oceans, tied to maintenance schedules, training pipelines, and deterrence commitments, especially in the Pacific where China is watching every movement with intense attention. In any given month, several carriers are in extended maintenance. Several are in pre-deployment training. Only a fraction are available for immediate combat operations. When the Bush arrives, more than a quarter of the entire United States carrier fleet will be concentrated in one single conflict zone. That has happened before, but rarely, and only when Washington is committing to a sustained major campaign with no visible end date. The official White House statement in early March referenced a 4 to 6 week time frame to meet campaign objectives. The forward is on an 11-month deployment. The Bush is crossing the Atlantic. Those 3 facts do not fit a short, defined operation. They fit an architecture that says whatever it takes for however long it takes. Now here is the piece that official statements are very careful to avoid saying out loud. This operational tempo burns through inventory at scale. Thousands of strikes means munitions expended continuously. It means interceptors fired defending partner bases, ports, and regional airspace against Iranian retaliation. It means escort ships drawing down their missile magazines and requiring emergency replenishment at sea. It means carrier air wings flying at rates that accelerate wear and consume spare parts faster than any peacetime schedule. A third carrier brings fresh weapons magazines, fresh aircraft, fresh aircrews, fresh interceptor stockpiles. It does not just add firepower. It buys operational time. And it creates the most dangerous fact Tehran has faced since this campaign began. The United States is not building toward a conclusion. It is building sustainment. You do not send a third carrier to deliver a final warning. You send a third carrier when you expect the campaign to continue long enough that running out becomes a real operational constraint you need to actively manage. That calculation is visible in other places too. Interceptor production schedules have been accelerating. Cruise missile manufacturing lines have been expanding. Emergency resupply transfers and prepositioning movements that looked at first glance like contingency planning now look like a long-duration war economy that started switching on quietly weeks ago. Now, let us talk about what Tehran is calculating right now. Because there is one sentence that appears in every serious strategic risk model of this conflict. Confirming a hit on a United States carrier marks a point of no return. Not because a carrier is untouchable in a technical sense, but because a carrier is simultaneously symbolic and strategic at a scale that nothing else in modern warfare matches. A confirmed carrier strike would harden American domestic political will immediately. It would collapse every remaining diplomatic off-ramp. It would push the conflict toward a scale of retaliation that would make the opening weeks of this campaign look like a preliminary skirmish. Iran's leadership understands this calculus precisely. That is why it claims hits it cannot verify, threatens the strait without fully closing it, strikes regional infrastructure while carefully calibrating each retaliation to stay just below the threshold that forces Washington into total war posture. But the third carrier tests that calibration directly. 2 carriers can still be politically framed as a defined, bounded campaign. 3 carriers say something that cannot be softened by diplomatic language. We are prepared to sustain pressure indefinitely. And that is what Tehran's degraded command structure is calculating around right now. While its naval assets are being actively hunted, while its missile forces are being targeted at the source, while the ocean it thought it could use as operational depth grows narrower every day. One detail from this week illustrates exactly how Tehran reads this naval concentration. An Iranian warship that survived the opening phase did what outmatched navies have always done when the sea stops being survivable. It ran toward neutral water. Reports describe the vessel seeking refuge under humanitarian pretexts because remaining at sea in a region saturated with American surveillance aircraft, attack submarines, and carrier aviation was no longer a viable operating environment. That is what 2 carriers already did to Iran's naval planning. Not just sinking ships, shrinking Iran's map, turning international waters into hunted territory, forcing commanders to think about shelter the same way civilians think about shelter. Now a 3rd carrier is coming, and the corridor of survivable ocean grows narrower still. There's a moment in any conflict when commitment stops being rhetoric and becomes visible in logistics. Not when a first strikes land. A first strike can always be framed as limited and measured, not even when the second week arrives. 2 weeks can still be packaged as a bounded response. The moment commitment becomes undeniable is when the supply chain confirms what the words implied. 3 carrier strike groups in 1 theater. Extended 11-month deployments. Accelerating munitions production. Emergency resupply transfers. Rotational planning architected for months rather than weeks. These are not the logistics of a limited punitive operation. These are the logistics of a country that has decided it is finishing what it started. The Abraham Lincoln is already striking. The Gerald R. Ford is already positioned. The George H.W. Bush is crossing the Atlantic tonight. More than a quarter of the entire United States carrier fleet is converging on one conflict. And Tehran just had to recalculate everything it thought it knew about how long it could hold on. 3 ships. 1 message. America is not preparing to leave.